All right. So what you paid your money for. So what we want to do is we want to add detail to our Thor hammer without actually adding detail to it. So if you remember from our first assignment, the basic workflow one, where we had a high-res version and a low-res version, and the high-res geometry was projected onto the low-res geometry, so it looked like we had that. So that's a cool way to do it, but it doesn't always work, because sometimes we just want detail where we want detail and not have to actually model it, okay? So that's where this process is going to come in, is we can go in here, and this is the Thor hammer I had before. You'll see I have these lines in here that, you know, weren't in the original model. I believe I have it there and there. Yep, and they go away, okay? So that's all texture based. So the way I did this is the same thing I showed before, you know, just adding the textures, adding masks to each one of those areas. Let me delete all of this stuff here just so I get back to just having nothing. There we go. And then I'm going to create a new layer. Okay. Now, anytime we paint a layer, we have to decide what we're painting. So it's not always just color, which is what we're typically used to, just painting color. We're painting things like reflections. We're painting bump maps. We're painting roughness maps. Over here on the right where it says properties, that's where you're deciding what you're going to paint on that specific layer. So with those little lines that I had in there, there's no color to them. It's the same color that I had before. It's just, it just bumped in, okay? So I don't need color. I'm not controlling anything with the metal. There's nothing there. It's the same material. I am going to be using the height map, so I'm going to be painting with that. I'm not going to be painting with the normal map. The height map generates a normal map, so we don't need to create a normal map also. And then roughness, I'm not going to do anything with roughness, okay? So the only thing that I'm going to be painting right now is going to be height. That's it, right? So here is the height value. So as I paint, my brightest white that I start painting is going to be, right now, it's at 0, so it's not going to do anything. So if I were just to start painting on this, you'll see that nothing happens. I'm just going to do just in case. If I go this way, it's going to go upwards, so it'll bump out. If I go the other way, guess what's going to happen? Go in, right? Perfect. So as I click and drag, you can see how it just bumps out, okay? The color hasn't changed. The roughness hasn't changed. It just does that. Now, just to show you, if I go to roughness, I can play with that roughness value. So let's say that I did want to have a little indent in it, but I also wanted that indent to be maybe not as shiny as the rest of the hammer. So then I could take the roughness, just let's say all the way up, my height all the way downish, not all the way, but like there. And then as I paint this, what you're going to see is that the roughness becomes very rough in that area and it's dipped down, okay? So sometimes you may want to do that. You may say, hey, I have this area I'm drawing in. I want to make sure that there is some color difference there just to help make it pop a little bit more. So you could do that with a roughness. That would definitely change how it's reflecting things. I could also do that with a color and just change this color to like something dark. I could even eyedrop the color out here and then go darker from there. Okay, that way as I paint, you can see how it's getting darker and dipped inside it, right? All right. So for this, I'm not going to use color. I'm just using height. I'm just dripping it down a little bit. Okay, I can test it out. Yeah, that's all right there. Cool. Now, here comes the part that's going to be a little bit confusing probably for most of you, if not all of you. So all of these things here are areas that we can paint on. So I can actually go to where there's materials, click on a material, use it over here and actually paint materials, which is super awesome because if I needed, let's say I had a character and I wanted there to be like a spot of rust, I could paint rust right on the character. That's kind of cool how you can do that. But I'm going to go to brushes because that's what I want to do. I want a brush. And I also want a hard brush, so I'm going to click on this hard brush material. You can tweak the brush settings up here. Okay, so in that same spot that I was adjusting the height, the normal, the color, all that, way at the top you can control the size of your brush, the flow, opacity, spacing, the angle of your brush, sizing, all that, okay? So now I have something that's harder that's going to be in there, so I obviously want to find something that's going to work nicer. So I'm going to go to default soft. There we go. Okay. Now notice here the difference. Okay. Notice how none of these options except for the spacing is changing. The only thing that really is separating the default hard from the default soft is this alpha channel, okay? And that's where we're going to be playing with a lot of our stuff, is that alpha channel is what's going to be controlling the values of it, okay? So if I come down here a little bit, here's that alpha shape. If I click on it, I can create any or use any one of these, okay? So just to show you, if I were to click this, and I make that bigger, and then I were just to click, now I have that shape like locked into it. So this is where it becomes really awesome, because now we don't even have to worry about actually drawing that shape out. I could just paint it. Okay, I can just click a button. To create an alpha channel or an alpha shape, we just need a black and white image. That's it. So if you're comfortable with Illustrator, you can jump in Illustrator and draw something out in black and white, save it as a ping, bring it into here. If you're comfortable with Photoshop, same exact process. Okay. You can even go online and download these things too. Okay. So what I need to do is I need to create, this is kind of cool as a hand. I need to find a shape that is going to fit what I want to do. And I basically just want like a little line. That's it. So like something like this may work. Okay. I'm going to take my size up. Boom. Okay. Now this painted it here and it painted it there, and it went over the side, so maybe I want to undo that and redo this again. There we go. So that works there. Okay. Now it still painted it down here, down there on the handle, but no big deal, because I could always do what I did before and erase it or put a mask on it or whatever. All right. I could also draw this by hand, so I can go back to that default hard one right there. I can go to that alpha. You can also type stuff up here, so if you just type in, what is that one called? Just alpha shape. Round, no. I thought there was a roundier one, softer rounder one. That one could work. That is. That's the one I wanted. Yep. Okay, so this one that I picked, this oval, it actually has a nice little edge to it, okay? So it's not super soft, so the edges aren't like, you know, rounded in. It's not super hard, so it's like cut. It's a little bit soft like that. That's what I wanted. Okay. So that's shape, circle, squeeze. Whatever. Yeah, that works. It's good. Good. Okay. Oh, I can get rid of the squeeze also if I take that off. Perfect. Okay. So that's what I want. Now, I want this to be created on both sides. Okay. So if I were just to show you, I'm using the left bracket. If I click here and I hold shift, it doesn't do anything. If I hold shift from where I last clicked, do you see that thing that popped up there? So that allows me to constrain based on my last point. Okay. So if I do this, so I'm going to click here, and then I'm going to hold shift, and then click there. So it draws a straight line. Now with me still holding shift, I can click there, and then right there. Okay. So very easily I could draw that shape. Now, the other side of this did not get that. So I want to be able to do that to both sides. One more. Up here, this is where we have symmetry. So we can turn symmetry on, and you'll get the this nice display showing you how it's symmetrical. So with the plane cutting it where it's cutting it, if I paint on one side of the plane, it'll paint on the other side of the plane, right? So if I go here and draw some lines, you'll see how it does it on both sides, right? So if I go to this, I can choose a different direction. So I can say that was X, there's Y, and there's Z. So just by going through the list real quick, I know that Z is the direction I want because I want it to do it to the other side. There we go. Another thing that I want to do is not have this in perspective. okay? If this is in perspective, look at what it does as I zoom in, how I can see underneath this. I don't want that, because what's going to happen is, as I do paint this, it actually will distort it on the other side, okay? So as I go here and I go like that, it kind of distorted it a little bit on that side, okay? So I don't want that. I always want to paint, anytime I'm doing this, in an orthographic, okay? And that just means basically when I'm looking at it from the side, it's perfectly flat. Just like in Maya or Cinema, we have our front, side, and top view. Those are orthographic views. All right, so I'm gonna do the same thing now. I'm gonna shrink this down just a bit. I'm gonna click, I'm gonna hold Shift, click. Sorry, the other button I can hold down is Control. If you hold Control, that will draw a straight line. Okay, where just holding Shift, it goes anywhere. Control will snap in increments. So I hold Shift and Control, and there we go. Okay, now they're lined up on both sides, and that looks pretty sweet. Okay, I could also draw a line, let's say right down the middle here. Maybe I'll put one up there. So I'm going to go here, hold down Shift, hold down Control. I'm trying to visually line up to the one below. Doesn't have to match up perfectly, but just close enough. There we go. Sweet. Okay, so now I have those lines in there, which again, very easy to do. We didn't have to model anything. All right, so now I'm going to take my symmetry to the X direction, and I want to put on those little like Celtic signs that were here. Again, I'm going to go to some sort of view that allows me to see that side perfectly. I'm basically going to be going into the side view here or the top view. Okay. I'm also going to make a new layer because I don't want to ruin that. So I'll call this Side Details. Lines. I'll call this Celtic. All right, so same thing. Instead of this alpha channel being a circle, I could find a different shape. Okay, so now if I go to this, that's one of the signs that they have there. I can literally just go boop and then hold down Shift. Oops. I don't want to hold down Shift as I draw, sorry. Click there, click there. All right, so that looks pretty good right there. Obviously it's off center, so maybe I should draw the center one first, like that, and like that. Okay, so now that drew it on both sides of my shape. All right, so that's a quick way to be able to do that. Another way we could do that, this is basically taking our brush and giving our brush a shape itself, okay? The other way we can do that, I'm going to reset my brush just to the round brush. There we go. I'm going to erase. Maybe I'll erase. There it is. So I can erase stuff. Go back to my paintbrush. Good. Is down here under stencil. So what stencil will let me do? Do you have a question, sir?
Can you set up the symmetry for both sides?
No, you cannot. It's one or the other. It doesn't let you do, like, it would be perfect if we could do this way and that way. It doesn't. Now, if I knew on my model, my 3D model, that it was going to be symmetrical, I could actually have laid out my UVs so they were on top of each other. So that way it would, when I painted one side, it automatically paints the other side. Okay, so that's something too to kind of consider. Cool. So the stencil area here, this is where we can actually play with different shapes that we could basically use as stencils to paint stuff on there. So if I click on the stencil area, it brings up procedural and alpha stuff. But again, I could clear this and get a list of everything that's available, every image that's inside here. Okay? It's only going to use the black and white values. It's not going to use the color information. But if I found a cool pattern, there we go. Let's say this one. Let's go with that one. Okay, so I click on that one, and you'll see what it does is it brings up these stencils that are now kind of like hovering on top of everything. If I hit S, here's all of my stencil hotkeys. So S right key zooms the stencil in and out. Okay, hold down S again. Let's It's hard to see, but it says stencil plus left is pencil snap rotate, pencil or plus shift and left. S and left just rotates it, S and middle pans it, and then Control S saves your project. Okay. Under viewer settings, you can also go down here to the stencil opacity and control what you're seeing. So if it's hard to see like where my stuff is, that's where you can play with that. You can also turn off the stencil or turn on the stencil while you're painting. So the hardest thing with this one is that you're going to try to paint it perfectly. And you just have to kind of line it up with what is in your scene. Okay. Now it would be nice too if we could put it in there and then distort it afterwards, and you just can't do that. It'd be awesome if you could. So what I'm going to do is just paint it on, and that looks horrible. Let me take my height out more. Nope. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to paint this in where I want it, like so. Okay, then I'm going to go to my eraser, shrink it down, and then just erase the stuff that I don't want. Okay, I could also create a mask and just mask it off too, just like that. That way, in case I accidentally take too much away, I could always bring it back. And it would be very obviously difficult to try to model this into the hammer in order for it to be projected back on. All right, so I'm going to rotate a little bit so I can see it. Just erase that. Sweet. All right. So now that went to both sides. I could then also paint it underneath if I wanted to paint it underneath too. Okay. This works with anything. So if I wanted to just make another layer and just call it dense or detons, there we go. We can grab our brush. We can go to our stencil, make sure that's off, yes. Go to our alpha. Let's see what we have. Scratches, there we go. So I can add some scratches to this. I'm going to turn my symmetry off. When you do details like scratches, that should not be something that is symmetried over to the other side. Some of these, if I click and drag, we'll just see what this one does. Does nothing. Oh, I'm not painting any maps. I have to paint the height map. No. That was weird. Height. Yes. Oh, I'm on eraser still. That's why. All right, so get rid of the stencil. Change my alpha to dense or scratches. There we go. Height only, yes, okay. So as I paint these, you can see how they're going perfectly straight the entire time. You can come up here and change the angle jitter just like you would in Photoshop. And then you can just click a couple spots. Maybe I want something right there. Okay. Now, how this projects on here is also controlled by the settings of that brush. So each brush has its own settings. So if you go to alignment, you'll see it says tangent wrap. And so what it's doing is it's trying to flow around the surface of that. Okay? So it's trying to flow around the surface. Sometimes you may want it to be on that one, or camera. And basically camera means line up with what I'm looking at and then project it. Okay, now where that could be an issue is if I went like this and did that. Okay, so now look at the top of this. See how it like streaks? So the scratches come up the side and then they streak and then they come up and then they streak again. So in that case, camera wouldn't be the best one. But for something like this where I want to go across all of these and I can see all those surfaces, it actually might be a good one to use, okay? Or I would use the tangent wrap. Those are typically the two that I play with. But you can see like this one, what it did. Not what I wanted. That one was closer when I went to camera. Okay, and that's basically doing these mini projections, just like we did planar maps or cylindrical maps or automatic. It's basically doing a single projection from the camera right on top of the object. Okay, so I added those little things in there. I could come down here and add just whatever. Look around these, because some of these you'll see are just amazingly cool things you may want to add to your stuff. Not specifically to the Thor hammer, but to something else. You could also use these for coloring. So let's just make a new layer too. Let's turn off height. Let's add color. Let's go to line stripes. Oops. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, and then I'm just going to make this green. It automatically rotated because I had angle jitter still on. There we go. And when I'm painting just color, it's actually updating just the color channel and blending in all the scratches, blending in all the other stuff right on top of it. And I think just a little bit more here maybe. There we go. That's gorgeous. Okay. All right. So now that I have that set up there, I can go to C, and I can actually see each one of these colors. Okay. So C on the keyboard shows me each one of my different textures that are going to come out. We've looked at that before. So there's my base color. You'll notice that the markings are not up here. The markings are not down there. The scratches are not anywhere in sight, because that was only written to the height. Okay. So when I write to the height, it only writes to the height. These bars, if I can spin around, were only written to the color channel. So that's all we're going to see. So I hit C again. You notice that they're not there. We hit C again. There's the roughness. We hit C again. There's metallic. There's a normal. And here's the normal plus height plus base normal. So that's where we're seeing all of that information. That's the map that we would then take back into Maya and be able to apply right to our character inside Maya. Okay, and then we hit C again, we're back to base color. Okay, if we hit B, just so you remember, B is the one that allows us to see all of our maps that are down here and how they're being applied to our stuff. If you see one of these that has a lot of grain to it, like my curvature looks pretty crappy, I may want to go and bake that texture again at a higher sample. Okay, leave that the way it is. I should probably save first. Bake. All right, so this is going to be 4096. You may also want to tweak some of your other settings. Hold on a second. Yeah, that should be good. You may want to change some of your other settings, like the max occluder distance. That will change how much ambient occlusion you have in your scene. So if there's areas that are like this and you're like, you know, I wish the ambient occlusion was a little bit more so that my edges were a little bit more scratched up or scuffed, that's where that's going to come in. Remember, these are what get used to create all the textures that we drop on. So when I dropped gold armor on there, it's using all of these maps down here in order to make those work. So the better those maps are, the better those textures are going to look. Okay, and if I want to tweak one of those, I can go into the mask for any of these, or I can go into these things and tweak their settings. So on some of these, let's say, for instance, you create a cube, and you're like, you know what, the edges don't seem like they're scuffed up as much as I would like them to be. Well, if you go into that cube and you tell it to define the corners better, it will find more scratches on the edges because of the map it's creating. So there's several spots. So this spot here is one that we can tweak. Also on these pieces there, we can tweak those too to make them modified and more scuffed up or whatever. Okay, so don't ignore these. Don't just click the button once, or some people haven't clicked it at all. Click the button, go through the settings, make sure that maps look good, and then you can start adjusting stuff. Bow, bow. And if you're not sure which map is being used for what, as you go into each one of these areas, you can see for the gold armor, it's using this, and this map to create that gold armor texture. That way you'll know that's what you need to adjust. So here, if you watch this, it should, I think it already tweaked that one, yeah. It smoothed that one out for sure. There's my thickness. There's my ambient occlusion. Okay, and then I hit M to get back there, all right? So let's look at that real quick just so we can see that. On my gold armor, it created all of these. That's what all of these pieces are. If I turn off all of, well, let me get a better piece. That wood is a good one. There's a lot of detail that goes into the wood. Wood, there it is. Okay. So the wood is made up of a base wood, which is just the coloring of the wood. Oops. There you go. So we have this base wood here. Now this is just a flat color. I believe that's a flat color, yes. With this MG dirt on there. Or is it not? It might be an actual picture of wood. Nope, it is an actual picture of wood on there. Okay. But we can still adjust the coloring. Right? That looks better. Look at that. It's 10 times better now. Cool. This MG dirt, that's where it's using or creating the masks, or using the masks. So this base wood is using curvature, ambient occlusion, world space normal, and position in order to create what that looks like. Okay? If I don't have those maps in there, it's not going to look as good. And if you don't believe me, I will save first, and then I will delete those. I will click the button to delete those while Substance decides to freeze. That's what I'm going to do. There we go. There we go. So that's what it looks like right now. It's basically giving our curvature just an overall look to it. And let's just disable this mask too so we can see the whole thing. So I say clear mask. Oops, not clear mask, remove mask. And I'll put this right up on top. There we go. Okay, so you'll see that there's not any real big definition inside here because I took all that stuff off. If I come back down here to where a curvature is, and I go in here and I find my curvature map, you can see that it instantly adjusted some of that. Now some of it's going to be more subtle than others, but you just kind of go with the flow. World space normal. Okay, that one really didn't do a whole lot. Let's go to ambient occlusion. We should see quite a bit here. Yep, you saw a little bit of that kind of pop in. Oops, wrong direction. Redo, there we go. Let's go to position. Okay, not a whole lot there. And then let's do custom ground uniform color. All right, so that was that one. So now I'll take on the wood fibers. I'll click on this map. And then this one too is using just this grayscale pattern. It's not using any of the maps. This wood veins is using just another image. And then here's the dirt. This one is using just that grayscale image. Okay, let me drop another one on here so we can take a look at that. This one for sure. Turn those off. That's weird. Alright, so this one's rust is using the ambient occlusion, the curvature, the world space normal, and the positions and thicknesses. I think I must have broke this because this doesn't seem like it's updating the top at least correctly. Alright, so watch the rust on the bottom. Okay, so here's the rust. Right? That's like 90% of this texture is that rust, right? So if I get rid of the ambient occlusion, see how the rust is now going away. If I get rid of the curvature, That didn't really take away anything. World space normal, took away a couple spots. Position, they're gone, and thickness, gone. Okay, so without those maps, that texture is going to look not as good as it should with the textures in there. Okay, so that's the punchline of that whole story. Okay, so make sure that you're obviously paying attention to these things. You're baking your textures. The better these look, the better the other stuff is going to look. This button here, where it says size 2048, let me just reset this back to my file before I screwed everything up. This is your actual texture that you're looking at, okay? So these textures here, when you hit that bake button, it actually creates a 4,000 pixel image for each one of those, okay? If everything's back. This is what we're seeing for that. So if I set this to 128, so your computer runs real slow, let's say, I can drop that to 128 and my computer is going to run faster because everything's updating a lot quicker. Now, it's going to look like crap, but the idea here is that we can work pretty quickly, dropping materials on things, doing some other stuff, and then when we go to render it out, we can crank it all the way up, okay? Now, be aware, too, that as you start painting stuff, I have a layer, make sure I'm painting, just paint color. Okay, so there's my horrible looking S on top of that. As I start going up in my levels, do you see how the S just updated? Okay, so one of the questions people say is, why is my substance file so large, right, regardless? Your substance file is large because it's remembering where you put those strokes. Okay, it's not just pixel data like it would be in Photoshop or something like Mari. It's actually remembering I did a stroke like this, so when I go to my 2048, it's remembering that stroke. Okay, so that's why, and that's what makes it so great, is because we can do stuff like this. And if I go to 4096, it's going to go to 4096. Now, this number here doesn't matter except visually what we're looking at. When we go to export, we export out whatever size we want, okay? So typically, like on the gear one, we exported 4096 for all of them, or we tried to at least. Sometimes it didn't work. Let me just reset this to 2048. There we go. Okay. So that's how you're going to add detail to this. I'm going to make sure I don't export that with that S on there. That's weird. All right, and then from here, everything else is the same. Okay, export textures. If you don't have your configuration saved from before, you can use the Arnold 5 one and just duplicate it. Okay, and then just take out the stuff that you don't need. We need the base color, we need the metalness, we need the roughness, we need the normal, we don't need the height map, and we don't need the emissive. Okay, so those are two items that we can just take out of there because we don't need those textures. Then I'll go back to exports. I'll make sure that my correct one is picked, Sarcona Arnold. There we go. I will tell it what kind of file I want this to be. Pings are fine. If you've had issues before, like we've had some issues with pings reading, you may want to just jump to TIFFs right there. And then obviously choose the correct spot for where you're saving your stuff. So not there. That's not the C drive. Sarcona file, nope. Organize, Sarcona file, 20. ThorHammer source images, there we go. All right, and then 4096 here. And then export. Okay, we're not doing anything crazy fancy with this. It is just that. Okay, like the gear one, we exported all the maps, we brought them in, we did all that other stuff. We only have one map, so we should be, or one UV set, so we shouldn't need to worry about duplicating it and whatever else. So then you can go back into Maya, create the AI standard surface material, Add it to the color, the metalness, the roughness, the bump. Add some nice lights to the scene. If you want to add something more intricate to the scene itself, feel free to. There's a whole bunch of stuff inside Maya that eventually we're going to start playing with once we get to environments and stuff. But if you want to start playing with some of that, you definitely can. One of them is this thing called Mash. I should probably type in Maya. Otherwise, I'm going to get Mash. There we go. So what Mash allows you to do is take a single piece of geometry and duplicate it in several spots. So if you had, let's say, you're taking Thor's hammer and you're putting it in some rubble, you could create a basic rubbly or ground surface, but then you want a whole bunch of rocks, you could use Mash to duplicate all these clusters of rocks all the way around. Okay, it's a very cool tool. You model one rock and it can duplicate it and scale it and rotate it and position it all over the place. It's basically like their version of motion graphics, but we're using it for funner stuff. Sweet. All right. Any questions? No? All right.